Welcome to the Apocalyptic Supperclub, nourishment for dire times, where I plate up stories and ideas to feed the heart and soul and nourish our capacity to meet this very challenging moment of being alive on planet Earth. My name is Christine Barrington, and this show is for you. Why? Because you matter. Without you and me and many, many others getting grounded, engaged, and caring about the world we create, we may end up with a world we do not want. So right now, your heart may be aching or your cynicism rising. You may be tempted to check out or lash out, but I want to assure you that together, with enough of us involved, we can blow open the doors of possibility. And today's episode is all about love. Love of ideas and principles, love of humanity and country, and a passion for putting that love into transformative action that ripples out into the world in ways we often cannot measure. Today's show found its inspiration a few years ago when I met a couple who was helping a relative empty a home after she lost her parents. In between the long spells of lugging book boxes out to the truck, they shared some stories about their lives and work. As the years passed and I reflected upon them, I continued to feel amazed and inspired by how they engaged as citizens. And I figured that if they inspired me, they'd probably inspire others too. Marilyn Green and Larry Jones are parents, grandparents, educators, and activists. They're the kind of people who move unseen through history and have made things better for the rest of us through effort, advocacy, and a relentless dedication to humanitarian ideals. And if it hasn't become apparent to you yet, these ideals are actively under siege. But if your faith in the power of public virtue is dimming, let's spend a little time with those who have the power to reignite our sense of hope through the stories they tell, the actions they take, and the ways they show us that we can be sources of hope too. So let's meet Larry.
My name is Larry Jones. I knew since fourth grade I was born to be a teacher. I thought for a little while it might be to play first base for the Dodgers, but I disabused myself of that pretty quickly, and I just knew I was put here to be a teacher.
And Larry Jones is some teacher. For instance, he led his high school students to multiple wins of the United States Academic Decathlon. Think Olympics for young scholars, where it's the president who gives you your medal. It's no accident that an inspired teacher like Larry was inspired by a teacher.
I went to school, elementary school in Malibu, and my fourth grade teacher was Mrs. Bokir. Up until then, I'd been really sheltered, and I had really nice talks with her. And she gave me a book one and said, "I think you'll like this." And it was a biography of Albert Schweitzer. I read that book, and I woke up politically. All through my teaching career, I tried to focus on individuals who were really nobodies, not kings, not emperors, but had gone from nobody but changed the world, did something to make life for other people better. And I was fascinated with Albert Schweitzer. Here's Europe's best organist, Johann Sebastian Bach expert, is making a lot of money, going on concert tours, but he had promised himself at the age of 30, he's going to give it all up and become a doctor and go somewhere where he's needed. And he was really famous as this organist Bach expert, and he gives it up at 30, goes to medical school, sells everything, moves to a little place called Lambarene in Central Africa, which today would be in the Central Congo, and opens the first hospital in that whole part of Africa, and spends the rest of his life from age 31 until he died in his 90s. It was the selflessness of it that, just being that selfless was just an eye-opener to me.
Larry's political awakening was a story of selflessness, and it led to an early activism that would become a lifelong habit.
I used to get 10 cents allowance a week, and I decided I want to send my money to Albert Schweitzer's hospital. And this is, again, fourth grade. I saved my dimes until I had $2. which to me was a lot of money back in fourth grade, which would have been the late 50s. And I sent my $2 to Albert Schweitzer's hospital with a letter, and I got back a postcard written by one of the sisters, one of the nuns that helped him at the hospital. And I still have it all these decades later. Dr. Schweitzer thanks you for this generous gift that it will help feed people and take care of people at his hospital. And it was nothing. It was $2. So it wasn't that generous, but for a little kid. Anyway, so I focused on the people that make a difference in the lives of others, no matter how major or small.
In case you've just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD, radio from the California Central Coast. This is the Apocalyptic Supperclub, where I share stories to nourish and inspire our citizen within. Tonight's show focuses on a couple whose dedication to democratic ideals has inspired many others to push aside their fear and lean into action. Larry's wife, Marilyn Green, is his equal partner in civic engagement. She is an epic canvasser and did her part to swing Nevada for Obama, traveling there every weekend leading up to the election, all while working a full-time job. We'll get to that story, but first, let's meet Marilyn.
My name is Marilyn Green, and I am a retired school district administrator. I was a bilingual teacher for many years, and then from there moved into being the bilingual coordinator for a couple of different districts and landed in Moorpark in Ventura County. And I was in charge of state and federal projects there. And I'm a grandma. That is a huge focus of my life right now. We have a lot of fun with our grandchild and volunteer in her classroom.
It turns out an early book also set a course for civic selflessness in Marilyn's life, too.
Water Babies is a moralistic fantasy for children, is a genre that I particularly am interested in. Water Babies is a very early book in that genre. And it is one that I read as a child, and it really did affect me. And it is so moralistic that, anyway, the water baby develops scales, which are symbolic of sin. But to rid himself of that, he must go somewhere he doesn't want to go and do something he doesn't want to do for someone he doesn't want to do it for. And so he does all of that, and then he becomes a little angel water baby again. Phone banking really feels like that to me, and canvassing on some level has always felt that way to me. It's a hard slog. And yet I think my early water baby training really gives me the backbone to feel like, I can do this. I can do this.
Contrast this desire and willingness to do for others with the ethos of what we are seeing in those who wield the greatest power in our country right now. People like tech billionaire Elon Musk, who infamously has said, "The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy," which he thinks is pushing us towards civilizational suicide. I don't know about that. A student once asked the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead what the first sign of civilization was, and she replied that it was a healed human femur, indicating the presence of social cooperation and community support. Helping someone else is where civilization starts, and lucky are the children whose parents offered them the context for why this matters.
Politics was definitely a thing in my household growing up. One of my earliest memories is my mother talking about the McCarthy hearings and being very concerned about what was happening with the McCarthy hearings. And my mom was an avid reader. And when she was reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, that was our dinner table conversation. That is what we talked about. And so even though my brother and I were probably, I don't know, maybe like 4 and 6, that was the dinner table conversation. So she was somebody who cared passionately about what was going on in the world and sort of raised us on that.
For those of us who feel intimidated about calling our representatives or joining a canvassing team, it turns out even kids can do it, which is both embarrassing and encouraging.
My earliest political rally was Adlai Stevenson in the primary when he was running against JFK. And so I have pictures of myself, I think I was, like 10 or 11, with a placard for Adlai Stevenson. And what was interesting there was that this was back in the old days that, you couldn't do this anymore, but we were standing on the tarmac greeting the planes as they came in. And Kennedy's plane came in at the same time as Stevenson's. And so there was a lot of jovial laughter between the two groups. And, I have this memory of my dad commenting about how there were Cadillacs on the Kennedy side and much funkier cars on our side. And he was joking about it was definitely a wealthier crowd over there. And ultimately, of course, we ended up joining that crowd and being very involved in that campaign.
Our voice and the capacity to use it confidently is probably the most powerful political tool we can have. Imagine being taught and encouraged to wield it skillfully as a kind of birthright.
Because my dad was a high school teacher and then a teacher at the community college. One of my other earliest political memories is we worked on school bond campaigns. And so as a child, I went door to door and knocked on doors and talked to people about the school bond and why we needed to have a particular bond pass and what it would build and what we would get from it. And so they definitely raised me in that milieu. And then my dad joined the Foreign Service in the Kennedy era. And so the rest of my growing up was in different countries in Latin America. And that certainly is a life-changing event and gives you a perspective on the world that is new and different and exciting, and one that really created my life trajectory, because I spoke Spanish. Then I was a bilingual educator. And then I was one of the administrators at the office that was in charge of things like English learners and parent training and parent education.
You are listening to KSQD, broadcasting across the Monterey Bay region on 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM, also live streaming on ksqd.org. This is a very threatening moment for lovers of democracy, and my guests, Larry Jones and Marilyn Green, are ordinary people who have made civic action an integral part of their lives. They inspire me, and I wanted to share their story on the way to inspiring you to know how much you too can make a difference. And by the way, that Foreign Service job Marilyn's father occupied was part of U.S. Aid. Yes, that USAID organization that, until recently, was saving hundreds of thousands of lives each year and enriching relationships across the globe that lead to immeasurable downstream effects, like helping to shape Marilyn into a bilingual educator and advocate for immigrants who are such a vital and an invaluable part of the American success story. Understanding the bigger picture, such as why soft power matters, like that provided by USAID, well, it requires a mind trained to think about current issues, which is what Larry set out to do in his high school classes.
I used to really try to get my students to watch the news. I would give an assignment where 10 minutes a week, once a week, you have to watch the first 10 minutes of a national news broadcast. It could be NPR radio, if you want to listen to one. It could be PBS, it could be NBC, whatever. Just the first 10 minutes of once a week, and then we would discuss issues in class and connect them to what we're studying in history. I would always tell my kids, if I can't connect history to today, what's the point in learning anything about it? I mean, it's got to have these connections. And I still remember this one really sweet young 8th or 10th grade girl. She just came to me crying and she said, "The news just scares me. I can't watch it. It's too scary." And I thought, how sad. I grew up as a news junkie. We've got to offer kids, what can you do to get over that? So one of the things we did was I would focus a lot on climate change. So the students got real interested way back in the late 80s and 90s and what's going on with the climate and the environment. And we did research on rainforests and how vital they are. And I found out how one person makes a difference. There was this young Swedish boy and his mom had gone to Costa Rica for a vacation. And this was back somewhere in the early 80s. And the kid was devastated to see the clear cutting of the forests, just bulldozers wiping out rainforest. And they were wiping out rainforest to put cattle on for Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's, all the hamburgers that we have up here are losing the rainforest. And this kid had his mom help him and found out the cattle industry, the burger chains are buying the land in Costa Rica for $50 an acre. And he thought, if they're buying it for $50 an acre, why can't we buy it for $50 an acre and not let them bulldoze it down? And he went back to Sweden. He started this organization, and they started buying land in the International Children's Rainforest along the Continental Divide in Costa Rica. And every year I had my students do fundraisers and buy money to buy an acre in the Costa Rican rainforest. And we've got like 30 acres that's still on this certificate that can't be bulldozed because Moore High go buy this acreage in the International Children's Rainforest. This one kid made that kind of a difference. So I would try to model that for my students, get them not to be so afraid of things.
And being less afraid is what I'm trying to do for myself and for you, dear listener. The current state of affairs is frankly terrifying if you're paying attention. But the worst thing we can do is turn away or curl into a fetal position, which is a very understandable and popular temptation right now. But reflect. In this case, turning toward has led to the creation of a rainforest that you can visit in Costa Rica. It's actually called the Children's Eternal Rainforest, and the original inspiration of that young Swedish boy exploded into a fundraising effort that expanded to over 44 countries, eventually culminating into a 54,000-acre protected rain and cloud forest, which is today the largest private reserve in the world. What might we accomplish if we knew we could make a difference? What might you accomplish if you knew you could make a difference? For Larry Jones, making a difference meant uplifting stories of selflessness and courage. And it is effective because human beings are story-driven creatures. When we are faced with having to make hard choices, it helps to be reminded of those who faced a terrorizing government and still showed up and ultimately gave everything.
So I focused on the people that make a difference in the lives of others, no matter how major or small. And I was always attracted to people like that. I focused my civil rights movement instead of around Dr. King, who I really looked up to, but I knew the kids will hear a lot about Dr. King. I focused my civil rights movement on Medgar Evers, who the kids didn't know anything about, but he was one of my earliest heroes. I'd play them the Bob Dylan song on Medgar Evers. When I was teaching in Malibu back in the early 80s, the movie had come out. And I searched for his widow, Myrlie Evers, and found her working at Arco Corporation. And I kept calling, and I'd get her on the phone and asked if she'd come out to Malibu and talk to the students. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said, can I ask why? And she said, well, the last time I talked to students, it was in Watts, and none of them had ever heard of my husband. I said, my students have heard of your husband. They've heard of you. You know, it would mean a lot. And she asked, well, do you have any Black students there? And I said, well, the truth is only one, and it's Flip Wilson's daughter. But I talked her into coming out to Malibu. We had this whole assembly at the school. She was just riveting. And she's been one of my heroes ever since. She became the first woman president of the NAACP. She was the first layperson to give a benediction at President Obama's inauguration. And then when I was retiring as a teacher and running a teaching grant, I decided we had a guest speaker every year. I tracked her down, and she was living in a retirement home out by Pasadena. And I had her picked up, brought to Moore Park. We filled the auditorium. People were sitting in the aisles, and I put together a whole PowerPoint on her. I said that the two bookend high points of my career, when I was a young teacher, I introduced her to my eighth graders. And now as an old man, I'm introducing her to this whole big audience. And again, she was just riveting it. And then I took a group of those teachers to Mississippi, and we went to Medgar Evers' home. And it's a national heritage site now. And it's still, the bullet that went through him went through the window and through a wall and dented a refrigerator. The refrigerator's still there. The chip in the tile's still there. The hole in the wall is still there. I called Marilyn, and I was just in tears. I'm standing right where Medgar fell. Anyway, so here's somebody that could have lived a comfortable life, raised his 3 kids, and dies young, doing what he thought was right to get students educated. The same when I taught South Africa. I always focused my unit on Stephen Biko, who was just a young medical student and decided to start the Black consciousness movement, and then gets murdered by the police at age 30. But after he has fought to allow education in the Black townships, and he gets beat to death in prison, and the kids became interested at Biko, and the rest of the campus, the teachers would always say, okay, Jones is doing a South Africa unit now, because the kids are walking around the campus singing Peter Gabriel's song, Biko, oh Biko. And Denzel Washington played Stephen Biko in Cry Freedom, and the kids became fascinated with that. So it was those kind of people that always attracted me, ever since the Albert Schweitzer thing at the beginning.
Albert Schweitzer no longer burns as bright in the collective imagination as he once did. In fact, he was one of my childhood heroes, and yet I had to go on a little refresher course after my conversation with Larry Jones. Albert Schweitzer's philosophy of life can be summed up with 3 words: reverence for life. And for this philosophy, he was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1952. I stumbled upon this quote from Albert Schweitzer's early writings about those who guided and influenced him, and it seemed to capture the spirit of Larry and Marilyn's way of moving through the world. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Sometimes it is a story we hear that reignites the flame, and sometimes it is taking action. Here's how Larry's class kindled a flame that crossed an ocean and returned back again.
One of the highlights of my career, we were studying South Africa, and Nelson Mandela had been released from prison. They'd studied Biko and the whole anti-apartheid movement. And one of my students' parents had gone to look at schools, and they came back with these photos of elementary schools in the townships that were just a cinder block classroom with no paper, no books, and everything from kindergarten through high school in this one classroom. The teachers every morning would make a map with rocks, just outline a continent or outline the world with rocks and this dirt. And there was a basketball court of just a pool with literally like a peach basket with no backboard. And the basketball was a gunny sack full of dirt. And they had pictures of the kids trying to shoot this gunny sack of dirt up into this basket up there. And the parents came back and said that the teachers told them, we're just desperate for books. We aren't getting any books. We don't know what to do. So we decided at my students to do a book drive, and we got other classes involved in it. And we started collecting books from all over, wherever we could. And the school gave me an old classroom up at the front of the campus. We just filled this room with books, and some were Dr. Seuss and little kids' books, and some were encyclopedias, and some were physics books, and some were unusable, but we just collected. We had thousands of books. Okay, what do we do with them? How do we get these to South Africa now? So we started checking, and we were asking a lot of people, and somebody said, well, I was on an airplane flight with a guy in Indiana who is making sewer pipes for South Africa and shipping them on ships out of Miami, these sewer pipes for the new sewer systems that Mandela was going to try to put in. So I called this guy and I asked, is anything going to South Africa in your sewer pipes? And he said, no, they're empty. I said, can I fill them with books? And I explained the whole thing. And he said, if you can figure out how to get them to my warehouse here in Indiana, I have guards because the black market is so big in South Africa. Everything at the ports gets stolen. I have security there. I will get them to the schools that you want to get them to. So then we had to get them to Indiana. We found a family in a local town that was moving to Indiana, called them. They had a huge Beacons moving van, and asked, are you going to have space in this moving van? And they said, yeah, it's not that much. So I said, can I fill the back with boxes of books? and explain the whole thing? And they said, sure. So we boxed all this classroom of books, took trucks to the San Fernando Valley, loaded them into this moving van that took them to Indiana, loaded them in the sewer pipes, got them to South Africa. Months and months later, I still have this letter from the teachers at the school. All the kids signed this letter. It was 2 pages of signatures, and some were very, very long, like 40-letter South African names from different tribal groups. There was a lot named Winnie and Nelson. But the one line that struck me was, thank you so much for the gift of these books to feed our minds. We promise to be a reading and better nation. Please send more. And my students felt, okay, I made a difference in somebody's life. Then we tried to get other people to send sports equipment for the schools. And so it was just a chain of events where some kids in Moorpark, California, making a difference for township kids in South Africa, and then getting this wonderful letter back from the teachers about these gifts to feed our minds. And that global connection, just to get the kids to see I can make a difference.
Do you know that you make a difference? Bad political players would have you believe that you do not. But when we return, we will explore just how much personal human connection can achieve.
Dazed and confused by current events, national and local? Well, we got a show for you.
Saturday at 11 a.m., What a Week brings you a listener's digest of the news you need to know.
We scour the web, read the papers, and dive deep into what's happening in Santa Cruz to tell you what you need to know when you need to know it.
Now, you can't be well informed unless you are informed well, and What a Week points you in all the right directions.
So join Tony Russomanno
And Eric Nelson
every Saturday at 11 a.m. on K-Squid 90.7 and ksqd.org.
What a Week!
This is Austin Powers, baby. You're listening to the only radio station groovier than the BBC.
What? You mean K-Squid?
K-Squid.
K-Squid, isn't it?
K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz. Online anytime at ksqd.org.
Yeah, yeah, baby. If the baggage of MAGA nuttiness and raw meanness is getting you down, ponder this passage from the classic novel Don Quixote. It is not possible for the bad or the good to last forever, and since the bad has lasted so long, the good is close at hand. Of course, the good only comes when fed-up people openly rebel against the bad. And sure enough, Trump's awful tyranny is revving up a majority movement for the common good. Soaking in self-delusion, tyrants start sipping their own bathwater, thinking it's champagne. So today's Washington MAGA moguls, drunk on narcissism, are imperiously rigging the rules so their clique can grab more wealth and power from the rest of us. Maybe they thought we commoners wouldn't notice or care, but we did and do. So the rebellion is on and gaining steam with nationwide protests and a surge in grassroots populist defiance. Predictably, Trump and company is now resorting to the same losing tactic that panicky despots always fall back on, deploying police and military to subjugate the people. He's commanded the Army and Marines to shut down public protests. Then, posturing as a strongman, this 1960s draft dodger spent $45 million of our tax dollars to stage a made-for-TV, Stalin-style military parade on his birthday, letting him strut around as warrior-in-chief. This is Jim Hightower saying, these are not shows of strength, but pathetic confessions of personal insecurity and presidential weakness. Sad. Don Quixote was right. The good is close at hand. So to all of you in the growing democracy movement, keep pushing. Push harder. Push further. Thanks to you, we're getting there, and we'll get there sooner rather than later.
Welcome back to the Apocalyptic Supperclub, nourishment for dire times, where uplifting stories are dished up to refill our reservoirs with hopeful fuel for taking on the challenge of rising authoritarianism. I've always wondered why more of us weren't involved in the kind of regular engagement required to keep our democracy healthy. While the answer to that is ultimately complex, there are a couple of factors that are glaringly obvious. One, unlike the students of Larry Jones, for most of us, schooling offers precious little education about how to be empowered and effective civil actors. Second, the media constantly bombards us with negative stories and, going back to number one, without knowing how to be effective agents of change, we understandably collapse under the weight of helplessness and despair, what I call civic learned helplessness. In this psychological arrangement, we experience a great deal of fear, even trying to approach actions that could make a difference. To solve this, we need care, education, and coaching to ease us into the waters of civic competency and to keep us swimming. There is so much we can do, we just need a little help. So for today's show, I turned to educators and activists, Marilyn Green and Larry Jones, a married couple for whom civic engagement is just a part of how they live. Sometimes, simply seeing others do what we fear makes it easier to step in and try it out. So let's talk about something scary. Traveling to an unknown area to knock on a stranger's door to be greeted by who knows what for the sake of a political campaign is called canvassing. I started shaking in my boots just thinking about it, but it's important because so far canvassing has proven to be the most effective political outreach tool. And as we mentioned earlier, it's something at which Marilyn Green excels. So I asked her about it. When you look back on your path being an activist, what are you the most proud of?
Probably the Obama campaign. The Obama campaign was fun from beginning to end and full of hope and joy. And the people that I met were amazing. And I basically spent my weekends, we would leave Friday or Saturday and come back Sunday night. And so I spent them in Las Vegas. It's not my favorite activity. I am an introvert. For me, knocking on strangers' doors and chatting is difficult. But I feel like it's important work. And again, in the Obama campaign, it almost bordered on fun.
How many months did you do that?
I am not really sure. I would say maybe like the final 3 to 4, but of both campaigns.
So 8 months of your life approximately.
Yes. Wow. And I was still working then. So that was a stretch.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do it now.
And so when you imagine the people I'm trying to reach, people who are good-hearted, they're concerned, they're seeing things happening, but they're kind of maybe dissociating or checking out. If you could speak to their hearts, speak to them, what would you want to say?
What I would want to say to them is that there's no one thing and that no right thing. I mean, I heard discussion about, the postcard people getting into it with the phone bankers. And I am of the personal opinion that postcards are an entry-level drug and that I want to move my postcarders into phone banking and canvassing because the research shows that as you get closer to person-to-person contact, you really have a bigger impact. But I would never want to discourage people who only feel comfortable from writing postcards. Everyone needs to find what is comfortable for them and what they're good at and what they enjoy. I don't inflict my water babies philosophy on anybody else. I feel like there's room in the movement for all kinds of involvement.
Not only is there room in the movement for all kinds of involvement is needed in the movement. Over the past months, awareness of the work of the political scientist Erica Chenoweth has grown exponentially. Known as the professor who quantified democracy, Dr. Chenoweth's research at the Harvard Kennedy School has zeroed in to document how and when authoritarians fall. And the number, 3.5%, has begun to be spoken like a mantra in activist communities. 3.5% being, according to Chenoweth's research, the percentage of a population required to topple an authoritarian regime. But 3.5% doing What exactly? Well, engaging, organizing, and strategically executing strikes, boycotts, protests, and other acts of nonviolent, intelligently targeted non-cooperation. In America, that number is somewhere around 12 million engaged individuals. The No King's Day of protest turned out an estimated 5 to 6 million, and it doesn't look like the movement is slowing down. But how do you grow these numbers and then translate them into organized, strategic players capable of standing up to billionaires, corrupt and ineffectual politicians, and powerful corporations? Well, it turns out you do it one ordinary human being at a time, each one a precious drop of hope. Let's meet one of these drops inspired into action by Marilyn and Larry.
My name is Chris Kuzma, and I'm a retired nurse. I worked for 35 years in labor and delivery, mother-baby, and I'm very passionate about children, and I was not really into politics per se, but now I have a real interest in trying to fight for our rights in our country. It was my sister-in-law, Marilyn, who encouraged me because I was so frustrated. I was angry, fearful, the changes that were coming, and everything that was in Project 25 was very scary to me. And so I told my sister-in-law, I'm tired of just watching the news and find myself yelling at the TV. And then Marilyn said that it was really important for me to get out and try to do demonstrations. So the first time I went, I was petrified. I'm a real introvert and do have a lot of social anxiety. And I did it because Marilyn really wanted me to go. I didn't even make a sign. And I thought, well, I'll just go and, see what it's all about, and stood in the background. And I met a woman next to me. She had 3 signs. And so we just started chatting. And I said, can I hold one of your signs? And it happened to be a sign about LGBTQ, which I'm very much concerned about what is happening with all the LGBTQ people right now because of Trump. He's going to be trying to do away with a lot of what they've worked for so long and deserved. So we got talking because her sign was about trans, and I said my brother and his wife have a trans granddaughter, my great niece, who I adore. And my sister has a trans grandson now who I really care about. And one of my nephews is gay and has a wonderful marriage to a great guy. So then Terry explained to me, she's out there fighting because her first daughter has special needs and is on Medicaid. And she was very concerned about Medicaid and losing that, as I am also for everyone, the children mostly and seniors that are on Medicaid. And then she said she has a trans daughter that's her youngest. They're in their 30s. So we had so much in common. We just kind of joked, well, let's be rally buddies. We've been going twice a week. We go to the Mission Viejo rally every Wednesday, where young Kim is. And then most Sundays we go to the rally in Irvine, California. That's at the City Hall there. It's a huge one. And then in between, we've been going to like May Day and to the King's Day. And so we've become very involved. We've made a lot of friends. And then I also have friends that I've never, ever thought that would come rally with me. 2 of my nurse friends, good friends of mine. I just asked them and they kind of came the first time just to see what it was like. And now they come every Wednesday and other special rallies that we have. And that part's been a great experience. It's helped me relieve a lot of my anxiety that I've had with what's going on in our country right now. And I still have a lot of fear and anger also. And I'm not really an angry person normally. But just watching what's happening, I can't stand by and just sit here and do nothing. And it makes me feel like I'm contributing in some way. For example, I just got back from a rally, and just to get all the people driving by honking, thanking us, yelling out the windows, thumbs up, totally outweigh the few thumbs down. And I have been called a couple times a communist by people, but we don't respond back.
This is KSQD in California's Central Coast, and you are listening to the voice of reluctant activist Chris Kuzma, describing her transformation from frightened and angry to empowered and inspired through taking part in local rallies, which are happening all over the country. Here she wonders what many must wonder as they wander out of their regular lives and into the crowds holding signs.
I used to think before all this, Marilyn and my brother Larry would talk to me about just get out there and start doing some demonstrations and it will really help. And I thought, how am I going to make a difference? I'm just one person. I'm going to be standing there among however many are there, and I'm not going to really make any difference at all. And actually it brings me to tears because I feel like I have made a huge difference in bringing people together. What happened, for example, today, a woman that came up and stood next to me, and so I welcomed her. She'd never been there before. And she said the reason why she came was because she drove by and saw us last Wednesday. She was feeling completely overwhelmed and scared, and she was afraid to come today, as I told her my first time I was. So we now encouraged several other people that have said, yeah, I drove by and I saw you, and I just had to come out this week. And every person that I see drive by, and we're holding up our signs and they give us peace signs and thumbs up. I know I am making a huge difference, bringing people together, like-minded people that think the same way, that are afraid. For example, my very dearest and best friend, Bertha, we were nurses together for 30-some years. We've been friends for 40 years. She's one of the ones that I never dreamt would come with me to do a rally. And she's one of the main ones that's out there every day. She was born in Mexico, came over here as an immigrant, and she is legal. You know, she's an amazing person. She's established, she's a beautiful family, and she's contributed to our society. And she personally knows people, as does Terry, that unfortunately undocumented, but they've lived here for over 30 years and worked, and they have been picked up, and they're nowhere to be found. And so that makes all of us that are out there doing these rallies thinking, we are making a difference. And that was huge for me, because at the beginning, I just thought, I'm not going to be able to change anything and help.
I can imagine that's a feeling many share when they first step out.
I did want to just add one thing that happened at the rally last week, which was really cool, is Bertha and Terry and I were out there, and this young man came by and he said, I voted for Trump in both elections. And he said that this is not what I voted for at all. And thank you for being out here. And now I've come to join you. That was a really feel-good moment.
So what's next for you?
Well, I'm having a surgery on Friday. Knee surgery. My friend said, you're not going to be able to come after your surgery. I said, oh no, nothing's going to stop me. And I'm going to get a chair, and I'm going to be out there, because we do have quite a few people that come even with walkers and wheelchairs, and a couple women that I met that are even in their 90s that have come. When we first started in February, school was in, and it was mostly older people like me that were there, which was great, but now since school's been out, and since we've been there every Wednesday, we've gotten so many more young moms with bringing their children, young teenagers, and even quite a few people in their 20s and 30s that are coming out joining us, and just everyone's so kind and so friendly, and it's just every week our rally is growing, and I get inspired when I come back home. It's like I'm revved up, and I can't wait to the next rally. And that's why I know I can't just sit here on the couch recovering from my surgery. I'm determined to get out there and sit in a chair.
This is the Apocalyptic Supper Club, nourishment for dire times. I am Christine Barrington. In this show, I share stories to feed and inspire our capacity to get involved and engage to help create the world we want before we're handed a world we can't even recognize. This episode is about the ripple effect that expands out from our actions that result in outcomes we often cannot anticipate. You just heard from Chris Kuzma, a retired nurse, an elder, and now a dedicated activist inspiring others to find their protest legs and stand up for what they believe. Chris says she knows she's making a difference. But people I talk to, often even those showing up at these demonstrations, express skepticism about outcomes resulting from protest. And after the massive No Kings demonstrations on June 19th, I went on YouTube to see what locals might be saying about the turnout in their cities. One of them, San Diego, saw an impressive and, to my mind, inspiring turnout of around 60,000. I scrolled down to the comments section of the video provided by San Diego's local television network, and there I read an unrelenting array of vicious and mocking derision. Scores of people offering their words to tell the protesters that what they had done was worthless and even comical. It was a valuable exercise for me, who is prone to look upon these demonstrations as incredibly important and valuable. And in the end, it did make me wonder again, do protests make a difference? Well, for a little perspective, here's a story from Jessica Craven's Civic Empowerment Substack called Chop Wood, Carry Water. This is read by Suki Wessling.
Time for a Pep Talk by Jessica Craven. On a rainy, dreary day in the early 1960s, a group of women protested in front of the Kennedy White House. They were there on behalf of Women's Strike for Peace, an anti-nuclear organization that began when the founder got fed up and started a telephone tree to rally fellow mothers against nuclear testing. Shocking as it may seem now, at that time the U.S. was still conducting above-ground nuclear testing. Radioactive fallout was showing up in breast milk and baby teeth. Women's Strike for Peace was advocating for the testing to end. So that's what brought them there, standing in front of the White House holding signs. One of the women later admitted that, standing there in the rain, she felt foolish and futile. And really, can you blame her? She was likely soaked and freezing and holding a soggy sign that was getting battered by the weather. There was no indication from the White House at the time that they were moved by the demonstration. I'll bet they left that day feeling like they hadn't made much of a difference. It wasn't until years later that they'd learn otherwise. Because, as it turns out, inside the White House was a pediatrician who was there for a separate meeting. As he looked out the window, he was intrigued by this small group of women protesting nuclear testing in the pouring rain. And he thought, if these people care so deeply about this issue, there must be something to it. That pediatrician's name was Dr. Benjamin Spock, whose name you may know because he became one of the leading activists against nuclear testing and proliferation. In fact, it was his work on the impacts of nuclear testing on children's health that was instrumental in changing policy, leading to the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963 that ended above-ground testing. And he may never have gotten involved in the issue in the first place had that woman and her friends not stood out in the rain.
People like Chris Kuzma or those women standing, sopping wet outside the White House, people full of doubt, but certain something must be done, are important players in the resistance. Why? Because they're like most of us, ordinary people, doubtful of what we can do, but knowing something must be done. To reach that magical number, that 3.5% of America, is going to require many more of us knowing we can play an important part. We just need to believe we matter and then get in there and figure it out. It's an eternal lesson and one that bears repeating. Here's Larry Jones.
In my classroom for 40 years, I had this plaque on my front wall, and it was right inside the front door. In 1966, Senator Bobby Kennedy went to South Africa. He'd been invited to speak at Cape Town University. an all-white audience because it was still apartheid in 1966. And Mandela had just been arrested a few years before that. He's in prison, and the ANC has been dismantled and is in hiding. And he went and gave this speech to this crowd in South Africa about America in the world and about apartheid and the anti-apartheid movement. And it's a 35-minute speech. You can look it up online. It's a brilliant speech. And if you go to Bobby Kennedy's grave in Washington, D.C., there's the main paragraph that I've got here is carved in the stone wall with a reflection pool in front of it. And so if you're standing with your back to Bobby Kennedy's cross and plaque, then you're facing this speech. I never mention this all year. And then the last day of school every year, I would save 10 or 15 minutes after final exams. The kids are going to be leaving for the summer. And I would go over to the wall and point to this frame and ask the kids, you walked in this classroom 180 times and walked out of this classroom 180 times this year if you came every day. How many of you stopped to read this? Never. They just oblivious. And so I said, okay, one more lesson from Mr. Jones, teaching one more lesson before you go, and I never get you as a student again. For anybody who thinks the problems are too big out there, I can't do anything. If you indulge me, I used to have it memorized, but it's one passage out of Bobby Kennedy's 1966 speech on June 6, 1966. Exactly 2 years to the day later he died, after being shot on June 5th. He only has 2 more years left in his life, and I'm still a Bobby Kennedy guy, the original Bobby Kennedy guy. And he said that your generation is going to have huge problems in the path ahead. Let no one be discouraged by the belief that there is nothing one man or one woman can do against the enormous array of the world's ills, against misery and ignorance, against injustice and violence. Few people will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of your generation. It is from numberless, diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up
for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression
and resistance. And I would tell the students, I've done my part, go out and be good ripples. And I would have students 20 years later coming and saying, Mr. Jones, I'm still being a ripple.
All we have to do is be a good ripple. Each one of us drops raining down into the river of change. Drops that, when combined, can gather into a raging flood, transforming the political landscape in its wake. Those who can see the gathering storm against democracy are thirsty for the sense that this transformational flood is imminent. Unfortunately, it's not quite there yet. But the drops are gathering due to the efforts of people like Larry and Marilyn, who are constantly working to ignite the spark of inspired action in those around them. In fact, there are thousands of people convening powerful groups that are organizing across America, groups ready to provide inspiration, education, coaching, and strategic planning. These have been created by people who care, people who want to be good ripples, and they are inviting you into this river of change. Won't you join them? To make it easier for you to do so, in the show notes for today's program, there is a link to a Google Doc that I'm constantly updating, listing the best of these individuals and organizations. Check it out. I update it regularly, and many of these resources will be covered in new episodes of this program. I am Christine Barrington, and this has been the Apocalyptic Supperclub, Nourishment for Dire Times, produced in partnership with KSQD, Community Radio for all of the Monterey Bay.